Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of I've Heard of Her. Today, we are going to talk about Sarah Emma Edmonds, aka Frank Thompson. We'll get into it. We are from the Civil War Museum. It is part of the Kenosha Museum campus in downtown Kenosha. My name is Samantha Mahalik. I am the registrar for the three museums, so I'm actually part of the collections department, and I help with the care and management of the collection.
And I am Jen Edgington. I'm curator of social studies education. So I primarily work in the Civil War Museum and the Public Museum, but we also have our dinosaur museum too. Not too many people there though.
Why do we do this program? So we started this program over a year ago now to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And we decided to celebrate the passing of the amendment in late 1919 and then the ratification of it in 1920 by highlighting women's stories of women you might have heard of but aren't really sure of their whole history. Women's history is still underrepresented in American history curriculums, and so we're trying to do our little bit to change that fact, which is why we're doing this program. There you go.
Absolutely.
So, like I said, today we're talking about Sarah Emma Edmonds. So there you see, there's an engraving of her standing next to a horse. This is from her memoir, which we will talk about in a bit. But there's not many photographs of her, which is a little sad. So decided to take that engraving and show off that. Just a quick thing before we start her early life. We're spoiler alert. She becomes a Civil War soldier, and I just wanted to say this is not uncommon. What we're going to talk about. We don't know for sure how many women actually served in the Civil War as soldiers. Estimates for both sides of the conflict put it maybe between 400 to 750. So that's not just a random handful. That's a good number of women. And so today we're going to talk about one of them whose story we know.
And we
So
should note though, with women in the Civil War as soldiers, they had to hide their identity.
yeah,
So there was women serving in a lot of other capacities as nurse or kind of like regimental mother figures, but this was women soldiers that had to hide who they were to fight.
exactly. Which is why we don't know the real number because they had to present as men in order to be soldiers. So let's get to Sarah Emma Edmonds. I'm getting better at that. Her early life, she was born in December 1841 in New Brunswick, Canada. So she is actually Canadian by birth. She was born Sarah Emma Evelyn Edmondson. Her father was a farmer. He was disappointed actually when she was born. He wanted a healthy son. He had an older son already who had epilepsy, and so instead he got Sarah. Even though she was perfectly healthy, he was not happy that she was a girl. Um, in addition to his disappointment at her gender, he was also very abusive. So that's the environment she is growing up in. She did not go to school as a child, so she was not formally educated. She was very adventurous, energetic. She would climb trees. As a teenager, she was an avid rider, swimmer. She was a really good shot. So she is a active person. Um, in 1857, she ran away from home to get away from her abusive father and an arranged marriage that he had set up for her that she wanted nothing to do with it. So she escaped to Moncton in Canada. She was afraid her father would find her, but it was a bigger city than where she was from. And so she co owned a millinery shop there. Unfortunately, her father did find her. in Moncton, and she had to run away again.
And that's when she starts living her life as Franklin Thompson. There's a lot of theories about why, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But she really is looking at changing who she is so that she can hide from her father. And there's a few different kind of stories as to explain why this happened. One is when she was younger, she read a book of adventure books about a young girl that dressed as a boy to get away with doing some like adventures that girls were not allowed to do. The other one is that her dad was so disappointed in not having a son that was healthy that she would actually dress up as a child to kind of make him happy. And so those are two potential why she decided to kind of live her life this way. But for the most part, what we can find, it was not an identity issue. It was more of an opportunistic way. So she realized that living life as a male was easier for her because she could hide out and she could make money, which she could not do as a woman. And so she was able to kind of live this life as Franklin Thompson. She becomes a door-to-door Bible salesman, and the person that actually owns the company says he's never had a salesman quite like Franklin. Franklin is able to sell higher than anyone else in the 30 plus years this man owns the Bible salesman, or the Bible sales shop, I guess. And she actually is continuing doing this, and then she takes her business to Flint, Michigan. So in 1860, she does move to Flint, and she's still a Bible door-to-door salesman, which is just such an old job when you think about it. And then she really is loving her new home, and she knows and she's more comfortable in the fact that her dad can probably not find her here, because not only is she really far away from home, but kind of on the outside, she's living as Franklin Thompson to make that money to kind of get away from him. And so one of the things she starts to do is, she's only 20 years old when the Civil War breaks out, and she wants to fight for her adopted country. Mm-hmm. So she actually travels down to Detroit, and at first they don't need her. So she waits around, and then she enlists on May 25th, 1861, which is pretty early on in the war. And she enlists as Frank Thompson in Company F of the 2nd Michigan. And she writes in her book, "It is true, I'm not an American, not obliged to remain here during the terrible strife, but it is not my desire to seek personal ease and comfort while so much sorrow and distress fills the land." And another quote from her is, "I could only thank God that I was free and I could go forward and work, and I was not obliged to stay at home and weep." So we can see kind of this, again, by stepping into this role of being a man in the 1860s, at least in this way that she's established. She can make money, she can serve now as part of a greater good that she was not able to as a woman. Mm-hmm. I do want to touch briefly on her military career, which is really interesting, and I hope Samantha will bring up some points later on in terms of why it's so interesting. So Frank / Emma or Sarah signs up for the 2nd Michigan Company F. So they are first at the Battle of Manassas. They did not fight there. They helped hold a line. But Edmonds actually never really fully admits that they're a soldier, if you kind of follow their pathway during the military. So at first, Edmonds acts as a nurse for those who are injured, and she's actually almost captured out on the battlefield during her first kind of stint. Later, she wrote that she had gone to war with no other ambition than to nurse the sick and care for the wounded. I had inherited from my mother a rare gift of nursing, and when not too weary or exhausted, there was a magnetic power in my hands to soothe the delirium. So she kind of saw it as her role to step into this nursing role. Mm-hmm. In March of 1862, she becomes the mail carrier of the regiment. So she's no longer in kind of that nursing role. She's now a mail carrier. So again, not a soldier. She is going to have to do a lot of pretty dangerous work though, because the mail carrier would have to go from place to place, often by themselves. There's rumors, right, that she passed fallen mail carriers going from place to place on her horse. We don't know how true that is. But it was a difficult job because you were very on your own and you did have to go into some areas where soldiers were not around. And so a month later, her regiment participates in the siege of Yorktown. This is where we don't necessarily know, right? Sarah Emma Edmonds is quite unique in multiple ways. One of them being she wrote an autobiography, and we kind of have some parallels between her and Belle Boyd in this capacity, that it seems very dramatic to be real. and not just us assuming that, but there's no evidence to kind of support what they claim. And I think that that's really important as historians for us to like put that out there. There's no evidence of this except their own words later. And so she claims that at this time she starts becoming a spy. She dresses contraband and she dresses like an Irish man to get information. But again, there's no, anybody else had never written about this, right? So we're not quite sure. And then there's also reports of her disguising as another woman to go behind Confederate lines. And there's just a lot of these weird rumors about her that are not necessarily great to talk about because we don't know if they're true or not. So again, she claims she was a spy. We don't really know. So again, they have the siege of Yorktown, going back now. That was kind of a tangent. But in May of 1862, so that's about a year after enlistment, she actually has to take up arms against the Confederates at the Battle of Fair Oaks or Seven Pines. And she also acts as a stretcher bearer at this event. During her time in the Army, she spends most of the time carrying mail or acting as a nurse, not a lot of time fighting like we were talking about. And so during this time, she writes that while tending to the wounded in battle, she came across a soldier on the battlefield that she thought was a younger boy. The soldier whispered that actually they were a female, and could Edmonds please bury her separately so no one would find out her identity. Edmonds agrees, feeling a kinship with the fallen comrade. Again, it's a nice sentiment story. I don't know how much historic record is proving this happened. And then also she does get injured while kind of serving in the Army, and that's at Second Manassas. So at Second Manassas, she does get bucked from her horse. She falls from her horse, and she actually suffers some internal injuries that are going to stick with her and bother her the rest of her life. So that's pretty much her military career as Frank Thompson. And I'm going to turn over to Samantha to explain why.
Yeah. So the reason is in the spring of 1863, so she's been in the Army about 2 years now, she gets malaria. So she really should be in the hospital at this point, but doesn't want to go to the hospital because she's worried that her secret's going to be found out. And so she requests a furlough from the Army so that she can go away, convalesce, get better, and come back and keep up this ruse that she is a man named Frank Thompson. Her furlough's denied. They say, no, you're not getting a furlough right now. Can't spare you. So instead, she decides to desert the Army because she cannot have her secret found out. So Frank Thompson is a deserter at this point. she does not rejoin the army once she recovers from her bout with malaria. Instead, she becomes Sarah Emma Edmonds. So she cuts off the son from her last name, and rejoins as herself, Sarah, a woman, and becomes a nurse in the Christian Commission. So now she's a female nurse. And she worked from June 1863 in this capacity through to the end of the war. At this time, she's also writing the autobiography memoir we were talking about. It's called Nurse and Spy in the Union Army, and it was first published in 1865. She donated the profits of this to various soldiers groups. It's actually dedicated to, I believe, the Army of the Potomac. And so you can read this book for free. It's on Google Books, because it's from 1865. The copyright's gone. It's a bit confusing, this book, because she does not acknowledge in the beginning of the book that she's a man. Her presenting as a man. It took 100 pages of me reading this book and being really confused and Googling dates, because she's talking about how her and another woman were the only two women, but I was like, but no, you're Frank right now. She doesn't know that you're a woman. And it's only when one of her childhood friends gets killed in a battle that she's really upset about it, because he didn't know that she was his childhood friend, and she finally acknowledges. She says something about the costume she's wearing. So it's a confusing memoir in that regard, which also makes it even weirder to think about how truthful is it if she can't even acknowledge that she's been Frank this whole time. So I don't know. I'm confused about it, and that's how I feel.
Well,
So
and I think with what you were just talking about, and you and I went back and forth about her living as Frank and what we thought in terms of identity versus
exactly.
kind of a role or costume, and the way that she presents it as, this is a costume for me. We kind of took it as, okay, she chose this as a way to escape and also to live a better life for herself.
Mhm. Yeah, and it just seems like she had already been living as a man. The Civil War broke out. She wanted to support her adopted country, like Jen said, and so it seems like in her mind the easiest way to do that would just be, well, I'm already Frank Thompson, so Frank Thompson can just go to war now. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until she got sick that her plan really crumbled, because then she realized, she'd be found out and kicked out of the army. Because then she lives as Sarah Emma Edmonds for the rest of her life. She never goes back to Frank Thompson. Frank's story ends when she deserts the army. In 1867, she marries Linus Seeley. He was a Canadian mechanic. They're still living in the United States, though, and they had 3 children. So after the war, she becomes a wife and a mother. Um, but her military career, she doesn't forget about it, obviously. She wrote a memoir about it. Um, so in 1876, she attended a reunion for the 2nd Michigan as herself, as Sarah Emma Edmonds, well, Seeley at this point. And she was really well received. She says that her comrades begin to help her, trying to clear her name, Frank's name, for desertion, once that they learn the true story of who she is. And so in 1882, she started gathering affidavits from soldiers in her company about her service as Frank. And it works. 1884, she's awarded a pension from the U.S. government. In 1886, Frank was officially cleared of desertion, and a letter from the Secretary of War, dated June 30th, 1886, acknowledged her as a, quote, a female soldier who served as a private, rendering faithful service in the ranks. So, she was able to gather enough evidence to convince the Secretary of War that she was Frank Thompson, and the reason that she deserted was to not have her secret found out. And this is so convincing that in 1887, she's admitted into the GAR, or the Grand Army of the Republic, which is a veterans organization for Civil War soldiers. She is the only female member of this organization ever admitted. There were sub-organizations for women, the Women's Auxiliary Corps and the Ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic, for either spouses or children of veterans or nurses, women who served in other capacities. They had to join one of these other organizations. They were not allowed to join the GAR. Only Sarah Emma Edmonds was ever allowed. So she was part of the McClellan Post in Houston, Texas. Unfortunately, though, she dies very young. She died on September 5th, 1898. And so she was only 57 years old. She was buried in her hometown, but at the insistence of her GAR post, she was actually reinterred at Washington Cemetery in Houston, Texas, in the Civil War veterans area. And she 3 years later, and so that burial, she had military honors, so she was eventually buried with military honors, which I think what I want to say next is best said with our question of the day, I think, which Jen can take over that. So that's her life as we know it.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting life in general. I mean, to be the only female in the GAR, which we do know is true, and to receive a pension is really amazing. So thinking about her life, and if you've ever seen our programs before, or if you were lucky enough to see it in person, we really like to have these as conversations. Unfortunately, virtual makes it a little bit harder, but we're hoping that maybe you can engage in some conversation in our comments of this video. So we have a question for you, and our question is, even though she received a pension and joined the GAR, should we trust Edmond's story? So I think Samantha has a hot take on that. So what do you think, Samantha?
Okay, I'll be honest, before I started researching for this program, I was like, well, yeah, it's true. She joined the GAR. She got a pension GAR doesn't mess around with who is able to enter it, because it's not even all Civil War vets, right? This is a U.S. Army only. No rebels, no Confederates were allowed in this organization. They had their own thing going on, which is a whole other story. I'm not sure now, though, because like Belle Boyd, like Jen mentioned before, we did a program on her earlier. If you missed it, check it out. It's awesome. Some of these things are too fantastical to believe. And so it just puts a shadow of a doubt then on everything. And so there is no doubt that a man named Frank Thompson served in the 2nd Michigan Company F, right? I did a deep dive. I was like conspiracy theorying this. I looked up on like Ancestry and Fold 3, and I found the proof that there are military documents for Frank Thompson. He's in like the National Park Service Civil War Soldiers database. Like, that is a real person. He existed. I don't know, though, if Sarah Emma Edmonds was Frank Thompson. That's my conspiracy theory, is she might have made it all up. I don't know. And I feel really bad for saying that, but I'm not sure anymore.
I think that she was, personally, like looking at what I want to look for, I think that she was Frank Thompson, because we know that other women were successful in hiding their identity. And so, like a really famous one is Jenny Hodgins, who enlisted as Albert Cashier and lived their life as Albert Cashier until an automobile accident revealed that Albert Cashier was born Jenny Hodgins. And so I think that we know that that has been, other Civil War soldiers could hide their identity. And I don't necessarily know if there's maybe all of the like spying and kind of those romanticized things, because it does seem like Frank Thompson was more of a helper than like a soldier necessarily. And I don't necessarily know why the US Army would be like, that mail carrier right there is going to be a really good spy. And you know what I mean? So that's where I don't know.
Yeah, it gets a little complicated in the middle of things, I think. So anyway, tell us what you think in the comments, please. I would love to know if there are fellow conspiracy theorists out there, or if, like Jen, you are able to kind of separate the fantastic from the true.
Perfect. And we thank you so much for listening. And please join us next month, which we will be talking about Ada Lovelace. So we're really excited. So thank you so much. We hope that you enjoyed learning about Sarah Emma Edmonds, and we'll see you in December.
Bye.